Hi, thanks for watching. Let me talk you through a time-lapse video of me painting an ocean wave. I got this photo a couple months ago when I went to Florida. I was actually standing in the water with my phone, hoping that I wouldn't drop it, and obviously I didn't because I have the photo. But yeah, so let's just start with my draw lines. If you're familiar with my style, you know that I prime my wood panel with a bright color. In this case, it's bright pink. And then I take a line, this is I think phthalo blue and white, and I just draw in the rough shape. And then I'm going in here with an underlayer of blues and greens. And the thing that I've learned about painting oceanscapes is be very keyed into the gradients. So I am currently working on a written out script for my online website teaching course, which is Not Sorry Art School. And one of the things that I noticed when I wrote this and whenever I paint waves is that you have a couple of tough things to contend with. One is that you're painting something translucent, and if you've painted anything, you know that that can be a challenge. There tends to be more colors and steps to really achieving that transparent look. And the other thing is that you're painting a mirror basically on top of a transparent surface. So both of those are tough, but it's not impossible. Once you kind of understand what you're painting, I feel like the rest of it is just taking time to put all those steps in to make it make sense in a three-dimensional, lifelike way. So again, going back to my previous point about being keyed into gradients, we see that the sunset and the horizon line is a gradient from an ultramarine blue to a yellow to a pink. And I sort of go in and try to block those in. The paint dries really quick, so usually I do it in multiple parts. And then I'm going to go in and create the gradient on the bottom left corner. You can see where the light begins to peek through. There's more of a yellow green, and then as it gets closer to the shadow of the wave, it turns into more of a phthalo ultramarine blue. And of course, because this is my first pass, I'm making sure that all my colors are a little less saturated or colorful than what I think they're going to be in the finished painting. I'm again sneaking up and just slowly reaching those bright colors that I want to achieve. So I went in with this alizarin crimson line and I thinned it out with a little bit of flow improver, and I just kind of re-sharpened and really punctuated where I need to draw and put in those other layers of seafoam. As you can see, I drew in the crest of the wave and these nice foamy lines that have formed where the wave is crashing. And one of the things I noticed whenever I was painting these lines is that there's a bunch of different shades of blue and violet and green, but they're all sort of contrasting with that true greeny phthalo underneath. And so I'm pulling these into some dioxazine violet. I'm also pulling ultramarine blue into this, and I'm sort of layering and creating some dimension to those waves by not just picking one color. Again, I'm looking for the gradients on the left side of the painting. Those waves, the foam on the waves are more of a green, and when I get closer to the sunlight, it tends to be a little bit more violet. So I'm trying to make really good value choices that really stay true to that as I slowly begin to tease apart the actual color in addition to the value. So I'm adding in the lit parts of the foam. So if you can see on the reference photo, I'll make sure to include it. The lit parts of the foam are going to lean a little bit warmer. So for me, I'm adding titanium white, a little bit of ochre, and just some residual purpley blues on my brushes to create kind of a creamy, neutrally warm white. And then I'm going back in with that white and mixing in some more purples and greeny blues into the actual ocean waves. If you look where the waves are breaking, it's pretty dimensional, and so it's very tempting to want to just put splashes, splotches of color in here. And I think if you're doing something really loose and impressionistic, that's not necessarily a bad way to go, but the level of realism I'm wanting for this painting is just one tick past Impressionism. And so I'm really pushing myself to find those values. As you can see, the crested wave closest to the right side of the canvas, there's almost like two waves, where the wave breaks and then where the water bounces up off of the surface of the water, creating like two lines of waves or sea foam whiteness on top. So basically you just have to know from that I'm looking a little bit more specifically for the actual values. And note that I didn't put the highlights of the wave in yet. For me, I know that I tend to overpaint the whites on waves because it is the first thing that catches your eye. But because I know this weakness about myself, I'm going to take a break and go somewhere else. So I'm going back into the bottom left-hand side. I created a gradient under before, and it's not necessarily that I think what I put in initially is wrong or bad, but by sort of upping the saturation and using that under gradient as a guideline, I can add a little bit better color choices to that already existing gradient. As you can see here, I'm just sort of playing up the color a little bit and making the saturation increase ever so slightly. So between the breaks and the foam, you can see that you see the water underneath it, the bluish, greenish yellow. And within each one of these, I'm trying to look again for a gradient. Where can I sneak in a gradient? I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. One, because truly within each one of these little compartments, you're going to see a gradient because the light in the water, like I said, it's translucent. So the light is filtering in through the left and sort of being obscured by the wave on the right, which is giving all of the water a yellowy green to blue gradient. But the other reason I'm looking for it is because gradients in your painting are a great way to really bring some beauty and some quality to your painting that's going to help it look a little more harmonious and, quite frankly, just beautiful. Not to say that all paintings have to be beautiful or that beauty is a benchmark of a good painting, but if that is something you're going for in your artwork, I would challenge you to look for as many gradients as you can fit into a composition. I've always done this a little bit, but it's something that I've really kept in the front of my mind over the last 5 or 6 months. And when you do it right, as in you put it in somewhere maybe you wouldn't have expected it, it's a really pretty easy way to up the interest and beauty in your painting in a fairly effortless way. And as you can see here, I'm just going back into the foam. This, a lot like the rest of my work, is a very back and forth process. And instead of thinking I'm just going to paint something in once and call it done because it's been, painted in to any extent, instead I always look at it as it's just getting me closer and closer to my desired finished outcome. And so while the first pass was good enough and gave me information, I can always sort of push it in certain places. And so here I'm going back up through the clouds and I'm adding some depth to the water that I missed out on that first pass. And it's just creating the illusion of waves. Another thing about painting water that's important to note is the further back in the painting it recedes, even if you can see some of those more individual little breaks in the wave, remember that the less information we put, the more far away something's going to seem. So I'm just making sure that the foreground has lots of yummy information. As you can see, the waves and the foam closest to the viewer or to me, you can actually see the individual bubbles. The wave, which is in kind of the mid-ground, is going to have quite a bit of detail, but definitely not rendering any bubbles in. Maybe little spots of foam, but no individual details like that. And then, of course, in the very far background, the only indication of waves is going to be just a slight variation of value, a little bit of depth, followed by a little bit of lighter pattern. It's going to just hint at waves instead of fully rendering those in. And as we can see here, I'm finally adding in those highlights. And again, I'm just sneaking up to them. I'm never using a full white. I'm just adding a bit of yellow and orange and violet, in some cases a little bit of blue, to create that depth and that dimension to the ocean break. And of course, in my usual style, I'm looking and seeing other places in the composition I can use the colors that I've already blended. And I believe I add a little bit to the cloud and then also to the very foreground of the painting, which is where the foam is. And just by adding that pop, it adds a little bit more dimension. And that's always what we're going for in an oceanscape. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it explained a little bit. And thank you for watching.